Hello and good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing for Thursday, the 12th of June, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. And with that, let's go ahead and welcome Robert on. We'll jump inside our domestic sit rep, starting with, by the way, before we get to this, we are going to talk about the riots. We're going to talk about the color revolution. I'm going to go into that in depth. We're going to get through our sit rep items first. Robert, good morning. Let's go ahead and start with the Trump administration putting some pressure on Mexico to go after politicians affiliated with cartels. That goes right to the top, by the way, but what's the latest?
Good morning, Mike. So this was actually a report released by Reuters, and they said that over the course of the last few months, the Department of State has apparently asked Mexico's government to investigate and prosecute potentially some of these Mexican politicians with suspected cartel ties. And according to people that are familiar with the matter, Secretary of State Marco Rubio or some members of his team have raised this issue at least 3 times in meetings with Mexican officials and have called for action against Morena Party officials, including levying additional tariffs if Mexico does not cooperate. I did see that Mexico's foreign ministry denied that this discussion happened at any of these meetings with Rubio or other State Department meetings. And I think actually Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau is currently in Mexico engaging in talks with the Mexican government. But I think this is possibly a strategic leak to the media by potentially a Trump official with the idea of putting pressure on Mexico's government, whether it is with the end goal of prosecuting some of these politicians with cartel ties or pressuring the Mexican government to back off on this clash over deportations.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me, but we know these cartel ties go directly to the top of many of the states, also to the top of the Mexican government. So I would not expect to see a lot of movement here, but I wish the Trump administration the best of luck. All right, let's move on to Jeff Gundlach. I love this guy. He runs Double Line Capital. He's one of the many he's an asset manager. He's the quote unquote bond king, I guess, after Bill Gross. And he's one of the many who've been talking about a potential bond crisis. JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon said last month, he said, I don't know if it's going to be in 6 months or 6 years, but there's going to be a crack in the bond market. What's the latest here from Gundlach?
So this is from an interview, I believe, that took place yesterday. And he said that America's debt burden and interest expenses have become untenable. And he said this could cause investors to move out of dollar-based assets. And he said there's also an awareness among investors that these long-term U.S. Treasury bonds are not what he called a legitimate flight to quality asset, and that a reckoning is coming on the U.S. bond market.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, one of many warnings. I'm not sure that it's imminent, but by the way, we are going to have. I'm going to do a full-scale briefing on Ray Dalio's latest book, which is on the coming U.S. debt crisis. Very interesting book. He has a lot of great insight into how this could play out or some of the effects that we can expect. And the great thing about understanding the effects is that we can prepare for them and get positioned for them. And so we'll do a briefing probably coming up next week on that. All right. The latest also here from the Senate Republicans is we've previously, Robert, talked about the Trump administration's push to have states cover more of these SNAP benefits, which the states really did not like. And now apparently Republicans in the Senate are caving on that. What's the latest?
Well, so the original proposal, and this is coming from that budget reconciliation bill that's moved from the House to the Senate. I think the number was 5 to 25% of cost sharing, depending on the level of fraudulent payments. And the Senate Ag Committee Chair, John Boozman, who's an Arkansas Republican, he said that the Senate is actually going to make some changes to this. They're going to delay when that SNAP cost sharing requirement takes effect, which will now be pushed back to 2028. And he said they're also going to exempt some states with a payment error rate below 6% from having to do any of this cost sharing. Mm-hmm. Where I think this is the Senate GOP. He's the Ag Chair Committee, and SNAP is an Department of Ag program. And I think this is an attempt to remove some of the burden of some of these states that do not have a high payment error rate, rather than having this be a blanket requirement. I think also part of this is I think there are some in the GOP that probably recognize the disruptive effect this would have, but not only on state budgets, but we've talked a lot about the environmental conditions that have to exist for things like the 2020 protests and riots during the summer of 2020, and one of those was things like the economic conditions, and I think this would have been potentially one of those catalysts for creating a similar economic condition.
Mm-hmm. All right. Hey guys, by the way, I'm obviously out of town here. I'm gonna try to fix my connection real quick. Robert, if you will, please continue. And then if I'm not back before then, Jared, take over our global sit rep, and I'll be back in just a few minutes. But Robert, please go ahead.
So FEMA has denied requests for what are called hazard mitigation grant program funds to more states now, and this now includes Iowa, Mississippi, Missouri, and Oklahoma. And the Trump administration, after denying these funds, said that FEMA is receiving these mitigation funding requests for what they're saying are non-catastrophic avoidable incidents, and that they're working to ensure that the federal funds through this program are spent on common sense projects. Oregon Senate Bill 916, I think we covered this a couple of months ago. It would allow striking employees in Oregon to receive unemployment benefits for up to 26 weeks, and it was defeated in a 15-14 vote yesterday or on Tuesday. And one of the bill's co-sponsors, State Senator Mark Meek, who is a Democrat, and actually switched his vote at the last minute. And union groups in Oregon have lobbied heavily for this Senate Bill 916 because it would have been, in effect, a strike fund for organized labor in Oregon. In North Carolina, GOP lawmakers passed Senate Bill 153 on Tuesday as well, and this would require North Carolina law enforcement agencies at the state and local level to cooperate with ICE deportation operations. And this bill would also block illegal aliens from receiving state benefits, which is now another state added to the list of states that are removing illegal immigrant access to health care subsidies. And this would also allow local governments with sanctuary city policies to be sued if any crimes are committed by illegal aliens in those cities. And then finally, in the domestic sit rep, Tennessee Republican congressional leadership, they submitted a bill which would potentially remove state and local officials from office if those officials disclose the names of ICE agents or any operational information about ICE deportation operations, which this bill is in response to the mayor of Nashville, who issued executive orders on disclosure that required city officials to report interactions with federal officials within 24 hours. And Jared, if you could come on and cover the global sit rep, please.
Absolutely. So there was some interaction with the Chinese and the Japanese over the weekend. The Japanese are just now publicizing this. A Chinese fighter from the Shandong Carrier Strike Group flew within 150 feet of a Japanese P-3 maritime surveillance aircraft, and this was over the Western Pacific. Now, what makes this unique compared to other intercepts that the Chinese have had is that this happened over the open ocean from a carrier strike group. That is rather abnormal. Normally, they're mainland aircraft coming out to meet their adversarial aircraft. And I do think that the location of this shows an intent to basically establish dominance within the open ocean in the Western Pacific. The AUKUS agreement is officially under review per the United States Naval Institute. The review is currently just to make sure it aligns with the Trump administration's America First policies. And Defense Secretary Hegseth previously said that President Trump is very aware and supportive of AUKUS and recognized the importance of the defense industrial base that it's going to help build. So I don't expect any kind of degradation to the bill. It may actually even be an expansion, or not the bill, sorry, the deal. It may be an expansion of it, and particularly Pillar 2, which is the technology sharing agreement, to see who can join, what kind of tech they can actually get, and how they would explicitly join and help the United States and its allies. And then lastly, down south in Panama, talked about them a whole lot. Per the United States Embassy in Panama, the United States is going to pay $8 million to replace the telecommunications equipment installed by China at 13 different sites down there. And the embassy expects this project to take 2 years. So it's going to go up fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. And we are going to move on now. So there are 60 protests that are scheduled for today. That is above baseline, continuing to tick up as we move closer to the No Kings protests. By the way, I want to just cover this right now. DS says, good morning, guys. For being honest, we didn't really see this LA protest riot coming, did we? Was there chatter weeks beforehand and planned or not? Well, this is actually false. I distinctly remember a month or two ago saying if anywhere was going to pop off, it was going to be in Los Angeles. And that is because all the way back in February, the LA City Council voted to spend taxpayer funds to what they called deportation defense. They actually asked the state of California for additional funds to spend that money to help protect the residents of Los Angeles against deportation. For months since February, going all the way back to February, there have been clashes with police. There's been direct action. We have covered that on the show numerous times. I explicitly said, probably back in February or March, because of the unrest that was ongoing, which has been by far the worst place in the country, has been in Los Angeles. Because of that, I said explicitly, and I did not repeat this enough times, but I said explicitly, if anywhere pops off, it's going to be in LA based on what we're currently seeing, because things were already happening. There's already violence at a very low level. And we're talking about scuffles and fights with law enforcement, which we have typically not seen in other places until a week, less than a week ago, over the weekend. So, this is a thing. This is something where I probably could have been more explicit and repeat this more often about what was going on in LA. But the stuff that's in LA has been no surprise whatsoever, because we've been tracking this since February. So at any rate, I just want to point that out here before we move on. But otherwise, great question. Now let's go ahead and move on and talk about our significant activities overnight. Riots continued in Los Angeles for the 6th consecutive night. And this week they've expanded to 9 other cities. So we're seeing riots in 10 cities so far. By the way, I don't know if my internet is cutting out. Hopefully it's not. I'll work on fixing that for tomorrow. So in Los Angeles, California, somewhere between 200 and maybe up to 400 arrests were made during rioting and also during curfew enforcement. Up in San Francisco, there were some arrests made for vandalism. In Denver, Colorado, groups blocked roads and hurled rocks and bottles at police. That's up near Coors Field. In Atlanta, Georgia, 6 arrests were made during violent demonstrations, which included the use of fireworks and also more rocks being thrown at police. And again, that was, I believe, following curfew. In Chicago, violent demonstrations against the Chicago police headquarters were noted. Protesters vandalized property, threw rocks, and also disrupted transit. In New York City, another site of ongoing unrest, police made dozens of arrests overnight. Protests did turn disorderly. In Philadelphia, which is another one of these big hotbeds of anti-Trump resistance, police made 15 arrests, including one for aggravated assault on a police officer. Here in Texas, well, I'm not in Texas right now, but I'm normally in Texas. Over in Dallas, a crowd on a city bridge was declared an unlawful assembly, and they threw objects at police. Police responded with the use of pepper spray. In Austin, Texas, hundreds protested at the state capitol and a federal building downtown. Objects were thrown, and police, which was probably DPS, the Department of Public Safety, state police, responded with tear gas and pepper spray. And in Seattle, Washington, dozens clashed with police near federal buildings, and rioters again used fireworks and threw rocks. Those are those red dots on your screen. I do want to point out there are 5 blue squares on this slide, and these are the sites of planned expansion for ICE operations. Now, I've not seen anything official come out from the Trump administration or from ICE, but multiple outlets are reporting that the Trump administration is at least reportedly preparing to deploy ICE special response teams to 5 additional cities. And those are the blue squares there in Chicago, New York City, Philadelphia, Seattle, and the Northern Virginia area. Each of these areas have extremely deep far left networks. I mean, Seattle is up there with Portland, belly of the beast, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York. I'm not sure exactly what the Northern Virginia area entails, but I imagine it has something to do related maybe with the DC area security. At any rate, down in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott ordered members of the Texas National Guard to San Antonio in anticipation of unrest later this week and this weekend. The National Guard will also remain on standby until they're needed. Per the statement, quote, Texas will not tolerate the lawlessness we have seen in Los Angeles. By the way, that lawlessness has been ongoing in Austin and Dallas. A blue state coalition of 18 attorneys general issued a joint statement condemning the Trump administration for deploying the California National Guard and also active duty troops to Los Angeles. 19 states, including Texas now, and the U.S. territory of Guam, filed a brief with the federal courts in support of the Trump administration's Los Angeles troop deployment. California Governor Gavin Newsom rejected Florida's offer to send in the State Guard to assist with the protests. By the way, the Florida State Guard I believe most state guards are unarmed, but Florida does have a State Guard special operations unit that is heavily law enforcement. And then Attorney General Pam Bondi said the Trump administration is going to invoke the Hobbs Act, and that's going to allow the DOJ to prosecute crimes in California that would normally be handled by the state government. Meanwhile, just a quick update here. We continue to make improvements with the new early warning membership site that will be coming out this month. And we're on an accelerated timeline, obviously, so that we have this open source intelligence platform built and at initial operating capacity for these riots, which are going to get worse before they get any better. But this new platform is going to allow us to better track the operational and also the national and strategic security picture here. What is clearly this burgeoning national resistance movement that really has been on low boil since probably November. And it got a little bit warmer in August, or excuse me, got a little bit warmer in April. And it's turning hot now. Now, I do want to point out something else in addition to that question that I previously took. 7 months ago, in November 2024, this came out on November the 8th, so just days after Trump was elected, I recorded this presentation that I gave live, and it was called The Coming Color Revolution 2025 to 2028. And in it, I told everyone that anti-ICE violence would be the cornerstone of the anti-Trump revolutionary movement. And I've been covering various developments in the color revolution. We've seen senior Democrats essentially call for this, or at least call for mass mobilization in protests. Hundreds of thousands, millions of people in open defiance against the Trump administration. And so I say this without hyperbole because we know what the doctrine is, and we can look at current events and see how that fits into the doctrine. We can gauge how close we are. We can at least gauge in what phase of this color revolution we're seeing. And so I say this without hyperbole. This is obviously the beginning of a color or some sort of popular revolution or color revolution against the Trump administration. And I've been talking about this since last year. So thank you. If you've been following us for that long, thank you for that. So let's just briefly describe what a color revolution is. It is predominantly nonviolent, and that is not to say there is no violence, but we're talking about mass mobilization protests here. And we're not talking about armed violence. So there's no organized political violence. We're not shooting each other in the streets, although that could eventually happen. That is just not the main line of effort. The main line of effort is predominantly nonviolent. And they attempt to essentially overthrow a government, or at least remove a government entity, a ruling entity from power. In this case, it would be the Trump administration, by eroding the three pillars of governance, and that is legitimacy, authority, and capacity. So we have these revolutionary actors, and they try to undermine a government's legitimacy, and legitimacy is the recognized and lawful right of an entity to be in power. So in this country, we have elections. So we have mostly legitimate governments because they were elected in the Electoral College. In the case of the Trump administration, won both the Electoral College and the popular vote. Perfectly legitimate administration. The goal of this revolutionary movement is to delegitimize the Trump administration. And so those efforts are trying to build the popular myth or the popular narrative that the Trump administration is illegitimate. And I think that's one big reason why we're seeing so much lawfare and so many court orders and judicial action against the Trump administration to to basically say that to the Trump administration, he's doing all these illegal things, therefore he's illegitimate. And so the next logical conclusion is he needs to be replaced with someone who is legitimate. And so this is those attempts to remove that popular approval or proper popular understanding that the Trump administration has the recognized and lawful right to remain in power. That's what attacking legitimacy is. Next, this revolutionary government tries to attack the authority of the administration, and that is the recognized and lawful right of a government to enforce its laws. And so this revolutionary movement attempts to undermine and encourage non-cooperation of those laws, encourages open defiance of those laws, which is exactly what we're seeing in Los Angeles. It's what we're seeing from these sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, basically saying, no, you cannot, we're not going to allow the federal government to enforce federal immigration law in our city and state. And that is making law enforcement, that's making the enforcement of those laws difficult in some places, next to impossible in others. I mean, that's the fight that we're seeing in Los Angeles right now. And then finally, the movement attacks the capacity of a sitting government to fulfill basic obligations. So these are when a revolutionary movement attacks the capacity of a government, they're attacking manpower and funding or resources. We saw this with California Governor Gavin Newsom coming out and saying, well, we're going to stop sending our federal taxes that we collect. We're going to stop sending that to DC. That is an example. And now whether he does that or not, just the threat alone would be an example of attacking the capacity of a sitting government. So that's manpower, that's funding and resources, that's equipment, the gear, whatever the federal government needs to enforce these laws. At the tactical level, property damage against ICE facilities and ICE vehicles, violence against ICE personnel and other federal law enforcement and state and local law enforcement personnel is an example of attacking the capacity. If they don't have the manpower, if they don't have the vehicles, they don't have the facilities, then they're not going to be able to, they will lack the capacity to enforce the law. Now, here's the kicker. When a government lacks the capacity to enforce their authority, they experience, they're delegitimized. They have a legitimacy crisis when they can no longer enforce the law. This is exactly what this is aimed at. This leads all the way back to legitimacy of the Trump administration and in some cases of the entire federal government. So that's the first thing. This is the cornerstone. Everyone has to understand. This is the cornerstone of this revolutionary movement. There also is a second consideration that I posed. Again, this was back in November 2024. And that's when the pro-Palestine movement was much more active. The pro-Palestine activism has sapped a lot of energy and taken a lot of resources and attention and support from typically what we would just look at as far left movements. So Antifa, there's a lot of overlap here with the pro-Palestine between Antifa, and so they have not been as engaged as they have been in, like say, in 2020 and 2021, because they've been aiding these campus occupations. At any rate, the second consideration is these pro-Palestine and, in many cases, anti-Israel groups, they are inherently revolutionary. Many of them are Marxist revolutionary groups. They just happen to also be pro-Palestine groups, or maybe the other way around. But that movement in the United States is still an active revolutionary movement. Jared's going to talk about this here in just a few minutes. But now with Israel threatening to attack Iran, this could be an opportunity for these anti-Israeli factions to begin another disruption campaign. That is almost certainly going to move them off of college campuses and onto potentially other targets in the United States. The campus occupations are aimed at getting these colleges to divest from their investments into Israeli firms or Israeli interests. And in an Israeli-Iranian war, whether that happens or not, if it were to happen, then we could see Israeli interests and Jewish interests targeted, not just these campuses. The president's relationship with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has soured over the past couple of months. We've talked about that repeatedly on this morning briefing. And that's almost certainly due to Israel's stated desire to attack Iran. President Trump does not want this to happen. He's trying to he's trying to remove the United States from these Middle East conflicts, bring them to an end, and pivot to the Indo-Pacific. So this is something that he does not want to happen. By the way, sorry about my internet. Let me see if I can stop my camera. If I just stopped the camera, let me know if you can still hear me. We'll continue on. So at any rate, I would also note the Department of Justice continues what's probably the most active justice campaign against anti-Semitism in U.S. history. Attorney General Pam Bondi, just I think yesterday or maybe the day before, filed a lawsuit against a Palestinian-owned coffee shop in Oakland, California. And this lawsuit includes essentially two charges. The first is for alleged discrimination of Jews. The second is this coffee shop has a coffee drink called a sweet Sinwar. And that's named after I believe the mastermind of the October 7th Hamas attack against Israel. And Pam Bondi said, quote, "You can't do that." She is trying to get this coffee shop to not have this coffee drink named Sweet Sinwar. She said, quote, "You can't do that. And so we've sued them and we're going to stop this from happening. And anywhere in the country, if you do this, we're coming after you." Now, we try not to editorialize. Actually, most of the time we explicitly do not editorialize on this show. But what a coffee shop calls its drinks, no matter how insensitive, should not be a concern of the Justice Department. There is no law being violated there. And this just goes to support the claim that this was probably the most active anti-Semitism campaign in U.S. history. And so my concern is that with the expansion or potential expansion of Israeli military operations against Iran, that not only inflames the Middle East, it could also activate larger segments of U.S.-based Middle Eastern diasporas. We're talking about Iranians, Egyptians, Turks, Saudis, other countries or other ethnicities and nationalities here. And so we could see that devolve into attacks on Jewish or Israeli interests in the United States. That would almost certainly bring about a swift response from the Trump administration, and that could result in reciprocal escalation against the U.S. government. So point being in all of this is we could soon be see at least three major domestic movements get aligned aiming at the Trump administration. The first is the mainstream Democratic and progressive opposition. And then to the left of them, we have the far left revolutionary movement. And then we could also see this pro-Palestine anti-Israel movement move on from the campuses to directly targeting the Trump administration, federal law enforcement, federal facilities, etc. This is that so-called red-green axis, which is the overlap of these far-left Marxist groups and then also the Islamist groups as well, many of which are Marxist, by the way. So this weekend's No King's Day, this National Day of Resistance. It started off as a National Day of Protest. Then it was called the National Day of Action. Now it's called the National Day of Resistance. Is of particular importance here. I first started covering this Saturday, 14 June protest. I started including it in the report back in late April, and that was before the date was even announced. And so this is something that we also have been earlier than anybody else, except for Indivisible, which is the group that's organizing this, or one of the groups. So given the social temperature that is rising, we could see this mobilization of 3 to 5 million protesters this weekend. And that is the best opportunity yet for far-left elements like Antifa to reactivate and go engage in direct action and property destruction, arson, violence against police, violence against other targets. This weekend's events undoubtedly pose the highest risk that we have seen in this country since the end of the George Floyd riots, which actually ended in 2021. So we'll move on to the rest of the briefing. I just want to take a moment and say thank you for your continued support. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting our mission. Thank you for being an early warning subscriber. I do appreciate you joining us, especially if you're one of the newest members we have. We are working on getting this early warning open source intelligence platform up and running this month. Again, we're on an accelerated timeline due to these riots, and we're going to start moving members over as soon as we reach kind of initial operating capacity. This means that you're going to be logging into a new website, and I'm going to send everyone details probably early next week with instructions on how to log into this new website and access your account. I just want to reiterate, this is a custom-built OSINT platform that we've been working on that's going to allow us to do a lot of the things that we can't do on the current member site. So this is the platform that we'll use for the long run. This color revolution, at least this low intensity conflict we have in this country reigniting, it's not going to be over anytime soon. We're going to go through periods of acceleration, and there are going to be periods of escalation as well. This is going to be a problem throughout 2028. And so we appreciate your support. Thank you for being part of the mission. And with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item here, which is, speaking of this group, there's a billionaire here, and he's pro-Beijing. His wife is involved in some kind of hinky CCP-backed scheme. What's the latest here, Robert?
So the House Oversight Committee is, according to Representative Anna Paulina Luna, who's a Florida Republican, going to investigate Neville Singum, who we originally covered in 2023 when it came out that he was involved with a group in New York called People's Forum. And the Luna says that this is due to Singum's funding of a communist group linked to the LA protests and riots and the Chinese Communist Party. And Neville Singum's ties to the CCP have been known since at least 2023. But the communist group that Luna is talking about, I believe, is the Party for Socialism and Liberation, who Singum does have ties to. And part of it, in mentioning his wife, Jody Evans, she was the co-founder of Code Pink and is also a former Democratic Party political advisor. And both of these individuals have been linked to multiple far left groups and pro-Palestine groups through a series of nonprofits that, as far as I could find, were founded by former employees of Singum's software consultancy company called ThoughtWorks in Chicago. And I think this is Singum is potentially a key component of what the Chinese Communist Party has been engaged in propaganda campaign or a smokeless war against the U.S. using foreign influence in propaganda operations. And I think he's a key component of this with the goal of undermining U.S. government legitimacy, which, according to what I could find from CCP doctrine, writings directly from Chinese President Xi Jinping, the Chinese believe this would undermine the U.S. government. Undermining U.S. government legitimacy would lead to it would ease the way to undermining other U.S. defenses. And multiple of these groups that he's tied to include things like the Palestinian Youth Movement, a group called No Cold War, which has been conducting protests in New York, I think, since at least 2022, where they've been pushing back against what they called U.S. aggression against Russia and China. And as far as I could find, the dollar amount, at least as of 2023, Singum's nonprofits have moved $275 million through this network of nonprofits to these far left and pro-Palestine groups.
Yeah. Thanks for this update, Robert. You know, one of the things that I've been talking about is attacking this movement farther up the chain. If you use writers, which sure, that has to be done, but that's the bottom of the chain. The higher up the chain you move, when you get to facilitators and organizers like this, when you go up to the mid-level and upper levels of this chain and attack the funding sources and the organization, you will have a major impact on the bottom of the chain, and it will result in increased effectiveness of localized disruption. So this is one of those probably middle tier, upper tier links of the chain, probably closer to the upper tier than the middle. But something like this is actually good to see. So thanks for that update, Robert. And then I think we're going to move back to Jared and talk about, before we move to Jared, we are going to talk about Israel, Iran, but I do just want to point something out. Blackrock is the world's largest asset management firm with 11 trillion, and maybe higher than that, maybe closer to 12 trillion now in assets under management. They say that they intend to become the world's largest crypto asset manager by 2030. And just full full disclosure, I'm a fan of Bitcoin, and I have been for many years. I would also note there is no end to the fear, uncertainty, and doubt being pushed against crypto assets in general, but specifically Bitcoin. There's going to be continued price volatility. It's going to go up. It's going to go back down. And maybe sometime it's going to go back up. That's going to everything that we have seen from Bitcoin for 8 years, something like that now. We're going to continue to see. I would also point out that when BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, say that they are going to be the world's largest asset manager for crypto assets, I think that is bullish, especially when you consider the backdrop of what's happening with the dollar, with U.S. Treasuries, and our coming probably bond crisis and eventual monetary crisis as well. BlackRock they said they were dabbling in Bitcoin in 2021. And in less than 5 years, now they say they're committed to being the world's largest crypto asset manager. I just look at that, and I think it's a lot of institutional money that's still going to pour into Bitcoin and crypto assets in general. There's a lot of retail investors' money going to continue to pour into it. The price could go way down before it goes way back up again. But in the long term, I think Bitcoin is a player, and I think the whole asset class is going to be, 20 years from now, it's going to be, well, not even 20 years from now. I'll just say this. This stuff's here to stay. It's not going to zero. It's not going to disappear. There's just so much institutional money. The price may drop substantially. If you follow the Elliott wave theory, and I won't get into that, but if you look at the technical analysis, yeah, maybe we do see a massive drawdown in the price of Bitcoin. But long term, it's here to stay. That's the Forward Observer take with that. Jared, let's get back onto this Iran nuclear deal. Israel's been saying for a couple of weeks that they won't even wait until these nuclear talks fail between the United States and Iran. They said if Israel thinks they will fail, and they essentially reserve the right to strike Iran. And so yesterday we saw the State Department talk about starting closing down some embassies and maybe pulling out of the Middle East, like Iraq in some cases. So what's the latest here?
Yes. So about 48 hours ago, we got the first wave of this. The top defense officials in the U.S. and over in Iran both said, "Yeah, we have plans ready for war in the event that things go that way, but we don't plan to use them." That's fairly normal. You prepare for your greatest adversary, and at the same time, here in the last 24 hours, we've seen the U.S. they began voluntary evacuations in the Middle East in bases and embassies. Now, I think what really kicked this into high gear was that Iran, this didn't get a lot of coverage, Iran reported that the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, had previously disclosed the names and locations of Iran's nuclear scientists to Israel, which resulted in their assassinations. That's what Iran is saying. So that's probably why Iran's getting particularly belligerent right now. Now, the naval base in Bahrain reportedly entered a state of high alert and authorized voluntary evacuations of dependents. I have seen that maybe they didn't change their alert status, but also Bahrain tends to be in a higher alert status anyway. Now, President Trump said he's less confident that the U.S. can reach a deal with Iran about nuclear enrichment and nuclear energy. That is a key point for what Israel previously said about if these deals fail, we will go forward with a strike. And the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Center advised all vessels in the Arabian Gulf, Gulf of Oman, and the Straits of Hormuz to transit with caution due to the possibility of what they're calling military activity. And as a last point, the Iranian Foreign Ministry did say that there is a new round of nuclear talks, and they're going to happen this Sunday on the 15th of June. So I think with that said, at least until the end of Sunday, I don't think anything's going to happen. But if those talks fail, and here we're defining failure as no longer leading to more negotiations or no longer producing concrete results, then I think we could see Israel prepare for a strike on Iran's nuclear energy, at least for in the near future. Now, I think between what President Trump said and the fact that the Iranians are saying we don't trust the IAEA anymore to monitor us, it looks like the deals are going to fail. Now, there is no apparent third party that can monitor this, but maybe the Trump administration's got something they can pull out of their sleeve. They've surprised us a few times. If the Trump administration, if the nuclear negotiations fail and Israel strikes Iran, I think it's very worth noting that we just saw in October, Iran and Israel can trade strikes and not go to war. That it would be facially damaging, but they did not actually go to war at that point. So we could avoid war there. However, if they did go to war, President Trump, due to how we've seen him handle the Russia-Ukraine war, he could potentially tell the belligerents, Israel and Iran, fine, handle it yourselves. We are not getting involved. He at least has a track record of that at this point. So the most likely near-term effects for the American audience here is a sharp increase in gas prices. Oil went up 4% on the mere threat of Iran getting belligerent. And as you mentioned earlier, Mike, we've already seen some of the anti-Israeli protests get violent anyway. I fully expect that will come into play if Israel and Iran go to blows, even if the United States is not necessarily involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is important for a lot of reasons. I would just say at the strategic level, explicitly confirmed that the United States is a backstop for Israel. That if Israel gets into too much trouble, basically no country's going to go to war with Israel because they don't want to go to war with the United States as well. And if this is no longer the case, I think this has enabled Israel to be very aggressive in how it conducts operations, knowing that the United States is a backstop. If that kind of relationship is coming to an end, Middle East could be a lot more dangerous. I'll just say that. All right. With that, Jared, do we have any other final points before we get to questions?
I've got the perfect segue here. Somebody asked a question for, hey, didn't Iran reject all of these? Yeah, they did. They said, absolutely not. We're not getting rid of our nuclear enrichment. That's why they're going back to negotiations. That's the last talks were at the end of May. Here they're resuming in the middle of June, probably so they can avoid any kind of war. Nobody necessarily wants this, not Iran, not the U.S. So yes, they did reject, but they are returning to the negotiating table.
Mm-hmm. Also, Iran pretty famously does not have a military that's built for force projection. Their force projection is done through proxy groups. And so Iran does not want to get into a conventional confrontation or long-term conflict with Israel. That said, I think Israel, well, I don't know what their calculus is because I don't follow it day to day, but my concern is that Israel may be content just to make a mess of Iran and not be concerned with the long-term mess. And maybe that falls on the plate of the United States. Other people say maybe China gets involved. I don't know. Maybe China does get involved. All right. With that, any other questions here, Jared?
Yeah, plenty of them.
All right. Did anyone see the leaked FSB thing that was calling China the enemy? I saw that. I was on the road yesterday, so I'm in catch-up mode yesterday and today, but I did see that briefly. I don't know if it's real or not. It would not surprise me if it were. But Jared, did you see that?
I did not see that. Again, I'm same as you. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
So allegedly there's some leaked Russian FSB document that expresses their concern that China is the long-term enemy, which should not surprise anyone. We know Russia feels this. Well, we strongly suspect Russia actually feels this way. They're the junior partner of the No Limits Alliance. Russia and China are partners out of necessity against the United States. I don't think they're natural geostrategic partners. So with that, next question. Is there any way the normal person like me can realistically educate or organize others within my community, church, or extended family towards awareness of the rising Jacobin left and the other long-term issues like bond crisis that we are likely to face in the coming months and years? Just a way to promote resilience and awareness within my community. Nothing too fancy. Yes, there's a couple ways to do this. I think the most effective way is to start with your area study. Because in your area study, when you look at the local human terrain, we look at social groups. We look at church groups, humanitarian, whatever social groups you have in your area. And the best place to start, it's like you go fishing where the fish are. And so if there are already groups that are organized, that are like-minded, then you start there. That's where you should start trying to meet people. And ultimately, this is a mission of inform and influence. We have to inform our family. We have and our neighbors and our social circles. And then we have to influence them into our way of thinking, or influencing them to remove their blinders or to consider alternatives to what they currently believe. I think this is largely a problem of ignorance. Most people just don't understand the long-term challenges that we have in this country. I think these riots should do a lot to start to wake people up. And so I would say start by networking within organized groups that are already in your area. Like, not that I'm carrying water for Republicans, but your county GOP meetings are probably a really good place to meet like-minded people. And whatever other social groups are in your area, just start linking up and meeting people and developing rapport and building relationships. And then eventually we're talking about building your tribe, or I say recruiting, but basically building a tribe around these people if you don't already have one. I would also say let them tune into this show. We're on here 5 days a week, starting at 8 a.m. Monday through Friday. We talk about the issues. We talk about threats. We make sense of what's going on. We determine risk in many of these cases where the risk needs to be determined, and we talk about it. And so, we're not hyperbolic. We don't make money off of clicks. We are 100% subscriber funded what we do, and we're incentivized to get it right. That's why we don't do hyperbole and we don't do clickbait. When we get it right, when we put in the time and effort to understand problems and analyze them, and when we are right about things in the future, members stay. When we are wrong about things in the future, members leave. So we are 100% incentivized to be as accurate as possible about the future. And that's why we talk about the things we do and describe the future in the way that we do. That's why we use analytic rigor to look at these situations and look at the most realistic outcomes. So I would say those two things. Number one, have them watch the show, read our report. Number one. And then number two, go fishing where the fish are. Link up with like-minded people, and then leverage that network to reach even more people. So I hope that answers your question. Although some states like California fan the flames of riots, federal law enforcement is no longer providing high cover. Can you quantify the impact of vigorous Fed law enforcement on riot activity? Well, here's the problem. Rioters are the bottom of the chain. You will never run out of rioters. And so they have to be arrested if they're violating the law, obviously. But in some of these cases, we saw 200, maybe up to 400 people arrested in Los Angeles last night for violating curfew. They're already back out. They're already free to move about the area and come back and riot again. That was the big failure, the deliberate failure of 2020, the revolving door of the criminal justice system. So if they violate federal law, well, there's obviously a much larger likelihood now that they'll be charged with federal crimes by the DOJ. But if people are arrested at the local level by city or state police, I mean, that was the big problem. They weren't getting charged, and they were being released, or charges were being dropped after they spent a night in jail. My understanding is that is not happening to the degree, that's not happening as badly as it was in 2020. I can't quantify the effect, but I can say that we have known since, there was that Black Bloc demonstration on election night in Seattle. And I think like 5 or 10 Black Bloc Antifas were arrested. And in places like Portland and Seattle and other cities, maybe not in every case, but in a lot of cases, we're seeing them charged, and we're seeing charges stick. So I actually do think the justice system is functioning at a higher level than it was in 2020, but I can't quantify to what degree that is. Next question. Does the federal government have the bandwidth and willpower to actually stop the activist movement? Well, listen, we have to be very specific when we talk about this, because when I say go after the mid tier and upper tier of the chain, target the higher links of the chain, I'm not talking about protest groups. I'm talking about the people enabling the violence, the actual criminality. Protest organizing is not criminal. That is protected under the First Amendment. I don't want anyone to think I'm saying that they need to go after protest organizers, because that is not it. But there is another class of organizers that do help facilitate criminal behavior or criminal mischief and violence. And those are the people, just purely from I say war fighting, but from a counter-revolutionary stance, you have to build criminal cases against these people and then arrest them. And a lot of that probably will be under some level of conspiracy charges like RICO. So do they have the bandwidth? Yes, I think they do. Do they have the willpower? I think they do. I think the problem is this becomes of a highly political nature the higher up the chain you go. And so I do think they're going to run into problems targeting the upper tiers of the chain. Some people may just be too powerful, but there may be links to people. Some individuals involved in this have links to people who are too powerful to charge. I think that's ultimately the problem they're going to run into. But that's not to say they can't start taking out links to this chain in the middle and also have an effect on the bottom of the chain on the riots. So I hope that answers the question. The left may provoke more support from other leftists at the margin, but I think Trump still has a mandate in popular support. Does the math work for a legitimacy claim? Well, I think this is all right. So back in November, all the way through January and beyond, the word of the day for these left-wing groups was strategy. They said we have to implement a strategy. When you have a president who won the popular vote and won the Electoral College, there is no claim on illegitimacy. That is a bulletproof claim. He was elected. He is the president. His administration is legitimate. So if you can't attack him at the electoral phase, then you have to attack him next at the legal and judicial phase, which is what we are seeing. Trump obviously does have a mandate. Trump has, I believe, popular support for immigration enforcement, even though some of these polls do say that a majority of Americans disagree with the militarized ways in which immigration laws are being enforced. There's probably some truth to that. I think it's probably generally accurate. Does the math? So basically, their challenge is they have to build resentment and they have to build popular dissatisfaction. They have to get a third or more of the country, and the more they get, the more likely their chances are. They have to get people dissatisfied, not just in opposing the Trump administration, but they have to move them to active opposition. Remember, the goal of this revolutionary movement is getting the mass of the people from some level of support or neutrality to some level of defiance. And the closer they move the mass of the people to defiance, the more serious this color revolution attempt will be. We're not there yet. You look at polling data, and they do not have the numbers to do this. And that's why we're still in the acceleration phase for at least a time being. It's something I'm following day to day, and I will obviously let you know when I think things are becoming more serious. But I still think it's early. All right. If the problem is if the government doesn't do enough, they invite more of these riots. If they do it too much, it can be considered illegal by the courts or immoral. How does the government navigate this? Well, I think they have to stay within the boundaries of the law, obviously. One of the problems that almost every government deals with in this situation, and I think the Trump administration is also dealing with it, is governments almost always wait too long to engage or try to counteract these revolutionary movements. Almost always, they wait too long. And the problem is when the government waits until violence breaks out, it's too late to easily roll back the violence. If you can catch an insurgent movement or a revolutionary movement in the organizing phase, then you can counter-organize them and you can do things to target, what's called at the latent and incipient phase. The problem is a lot of that stuff at the latent and incipient phase is not actually illegal it's either not illegal or it is being done to where it's not easily observed. It's not easily observable, which is why these governments almost always wait too late to act, because they're just not aware of the problem. The problem for us in 2025 and for the Trump administration specifically is that they didn't do enough to disrupt and combat these far left networks from 2017 to 2021, although it was a major problem. And then you get the Biden administration, who not only did nothing to disrupt these networks, but in many cases aided and embedded them. And so you cannot have an effective counter-revolutionary strategy when every 4 years you are pivoting from targeting to support. And this is the problem that we have in 2025. We've gone through 4 years of support, and now we're pivoting back to targeting. And the problem is these networks have gotten deeper and more entrenched over the past 4 years since Biden. So that's where we are. How does the government navigate this? They have to do it through the justice system. The more militarized the response will be, and listen, well, let me just say this. The more militarized the response is, the more provocative it will be. The question is what the Trump administration doing now, talking about deploying more SRT, special response teams, to places like Seattle and Chicago and Philadelphia and New York? Is this a case of 4D chess? Is there some master plan? There's some strategy at play? Or is this a cluster you-know-what waiting to happen? I don't know that. But it's not uncommon for us to see deliberate provocations where you go into a place, you shake things up, you see what lights up, you see who gets active and who starts doing things. And then once they start to do things that are observable, once these facilitators start doing things above the threshold of our ability to observe them, then we can identify them. And in this case, then you can start building a criminal conspiracy case against them. Best case scenario, that's what we're looking at. Worst case scenario is Trump is a bull in a china shop, which he has been most of the time, I think. Just being very realistic with my professional opinion. And this is what we're seeing. But I hope there's some strategy here. I'm not sold that there is. All right, Jared, we'll do one more question since we're at an hour. Been with you guys since 2019. Your updates kept friends safe in 2020. Well, Doc, first of all, thanks. 2020 was a big year for us. That's when it was a proof of concept year for us that we actually can track at an operational and a national and strategic level, track these movements. We've been doing this for many years now, since 2016. So thanks for being an early adopter, Doc, and we appreciate that. All right, Jared, last question. Given Bitcoin and crypto is getting mainstream adoption, do you see that moderating the price inflation of everyday goods and services do you see that moderating the price of inflation of everyday goods and services seeing as bad money has a new asset class to flow to? I don't think it's going to have any impact on inflation whatsoever, if I understand your question correctly. I don't think there's enough dollars going out of circulation into Bitcoin. I mean, remember, anyone buying Bitcoin means someone's selling Bitcoin. So I don't think there's a net effect of dollars whatsoever. It's just dollars are being transferred somewhere else. It's not like Bitcoin is sucking up dollars. If you're buying Bitcoin in dollars, you're selling Bitcoin in dollars. Someone else on the other side is selling in dollars and they get those dollars. So we're not talking about money moving out of the system. All right, with that, everyone, thanks so much for your support. If you're new around here, we do this every day, Monday through Friday, starting at 08 Central Time. Thanks for the support. Thanks for watching. And we'll be back in your box tomorrow morning, back on the show, starting at 08 Central. Until then, be well and stay out front.